I'd like to start off my presentation. I call it the nuclear legacy of the Marshall Islands, but in reality, the Marshall Islands and the American nuclear legacy are interlinked. So just to give you guys a background, where is the Marshall Islands and where is Micronesia? And basically, the Marshall Islands is an independent nation with a special agreement with the United States called the Compact of Free Association, which I'll go into a little bit later. All right, just to kind of show you guys on the map where the Marshall Islands is, it's right there. In Micronesia, there's the Marshall Islands right there. Before it became under the U.S., it was after World War II. Before that, it actually was under Japan. So when the U.S. won the war, they took the Marshall Islands from Japan because of its strategic significance. So just to show you guys a map, it's basically those are the atolls and islands that compose the Marshall Islands. And for the benefit of our Japanese audience, I decided to pick a map that has Japanese characters also. So basically, the Marshall Islands is composed of 29 atolls and 5 islands. So if you guys don't know what atolls are, they're basically sunken volcanoes. And basically, the reason why they were able to prove Darwin's theory that atolls were actually sunken volcanoes was because they actually had to drill those islands that the testings were done to kind of find out how old that limestone is. So basically, the islands where they tested the bombs, they drilled it and they were able to prove Darwin's theory that atolls were actually sunken volcanoes. 108 megatons, which is the equivalent of basically 1.6 Hiroshima bombs every day for the 12 years of testing. So basically every day it's like 1.6 Hiroshima bombs until 12 years have passed. The two testing sites were in Bikini and Eniwetok, 24 in Bikini, and of course 43 in Eniwetok. Of course, you guys already know that about the 2 bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So basically, after the Trinity test in the 1940s, they immediately started testing in the Marshall Islands in 1946. And this was before a formal United Nations Charter was signed in 1947. So before the United Nations kind of designated the Marshall Islands as a strategic trust in 1947, the U.S. had already commenced its testing in 1946. So basically, as you see there, it started with Bikini. And you guys already know that this is where the swimsuit name came from, but it's actually an indigenous word that comes from the Marshall Islands. And it literally means Biguni, where a place of sand. Ni is basically a coconut tree. It's known for a sandy place because if you go there, it's a really, really beautiful place. And you would think to yourself, why would anyone drop bombs here in one of the most beautiful atolls in the entire world? So basically 167 Bikinians were relocated, and they went to the people, told them that it was for the good of mankind. The original chief was not there. They told the landowner, told him he was king, kind of compared him to the biblical king that would supposedly kind of lead the people. So basically you are doing something for the good of mankind. So it kind of resonated well with them being Christians because we've been Christianized since the 1850s by the American Boston missionaries. So Christianity's imprint had already been embedded in most of us to the point where if people came to us asking for help, we felt that we had to give in. And it doesn't help that ever since the atrocities of World War II, the people, being the Americans that kind of liberated us after World War II, we were kind of enthralled by our captors, basically. So that was very convincing when they came and told us that it was kind of the testing that will end all world wars. That was something that was a policy during the Cold War period. As you guys all know, nuclear deterrence, something we're trying to get people out of that mindset where scaring people off by holding a nuclear arsenal is not the solution to stopping people from building their nuclear arms, basically. So, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of history. Basically, as you guys know, it started in 1946 and ended in 1958 with the last bombing. And one of the things that you guys already know, which is, I don't know if you guys, most of you guys know, but the most famous bomb actually was on March 1st, 1954. Does anybody know why that is? Yes.
The hydrogen bomb in Bravo.
Yep, Bravo. The reason why it's really famous was because there were actual people there that were actually directly affected by Bravo. And that's why I'm here. I wanted to give you a brief history on why that is. So basically, in 1946, during the first size Hiroshima bomb that was going to be tested, they evacuated people from the atolls of Wako, Eniweza, Bikini, and Rongola to kind of give them that safe space so that the people don't get affected. But during the Bravo testing of March 1st, 1954, which was a bomb that was predicted to be 250 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb, but turned out to be 1,000 times, nobody was evacuated. So the story of that goes, March 1st, it got detonated. The wind took over the fallout. March 2nd, the American personnel, being aware of the fallout path, were evacuated. March 3rd, the people of Ilinganay and Romola started to see showering radioactive dust falling down. Most of the children thought it was detergent. Some of them thought it was soap. So they just started playing with it. Some of them putting it in their hair, started losing their hair. Some of them started to get sick because it went into their water, their food. They just scraped it off, not knowing what it was. They thought it was just a form of soap. So, but that was, of course, March 3rd. On March 4th, it went on to Uduruk Atoll, where some people were also exposed. And the saddest part is another atoll, which one of my colleagues is from, on Ailok, was also subjected to the fallout. But because it was deemed inconvenient to evacuate 400 people, they weren't evacuated, despite them sharing the same level of radiation, being exposed to the fallout, about the same amount as Uduruk Atoll that you saw on the map. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to show you guys a visual. So if you look over there, obviously those are the two testing sites. Eniweza, which is the most western atoll in the Marshall Islands. And of course, Bikini, where you get to show Bikini Bottom, SpongeBob SquarePants, the bikini swimsuit, because a French designer thought it would be like the bomb to like kind of name a swimsuit out of where the bomb was detonated. And of course, those are the four atolls that were where the fallout is recognized by the United States government. You got Ilinganay, Rohala, and then you got Uduruk over there. So if you look over there, you see Ailok. But the position of the Marshallese people, of course, with the yields of about 180 tons, it's pretty obvious that those weren't the only atolls that were affected. So I would have to have you go to the next slide, please. So you guys already saw this, the Cactus Dome, where some of that fallout was actually put there. As we all know, the half-life of plutonium-239, it lasts for 24,000 years. So most of us are lucky if we get to live 100 years. So just imagine living with that, and especially for a subsistence lifestyle people, they have to basically live off the land. And as you saw in the video clip, in the 1950s, they were basically doing that. That's actually one of the craters from the bomb. This is just I thought it would be nice to give you guys a visual of the Baker test, which was one of the tests. And you guys can see some of the ships being sucked in. Those are some of the ships that were captured from the Japanese. So they actually wanted to test the bomb to see how it would affect like a naval fleet. So they captured them, aligned them up, and boom. Okay, you actually heard some of the discussions earlier in the clips of the impacts. Of course, we've got tangible impacts and intangible. We got a loss of livelihood, sustainable livelihood. People were taking from their environment, taking to a smaller place with no lagoon. They couldn't fish. They became very, very dependent on canned food, increasing the level of diabetes, being very, very dependent on foreign aid. And here we have tangible diseases. The people in Bikini that were taken to one of the atolls in Romaruk, which was very, very dry, one of them actually died of starvation. They became malnourished. They had to be evacuated again. And you got basically deteriorating health of people exposed to cancer. There are still intergenerational effects. And if I must also tell you guys a phenomenon that happened during the Bravo incident, some of the women gave birth to what they call jelly babies, which were basically babies that looked like jellyfish. When they were put on the labor table, they just go up and down. If you know what a jellyfish looks like, that's basically what some of the women were subjected to. The trauma was very, very real. Some of them gave birth to children that had tails. Some of them couldn't even have babies at all. And some of them even had babies that had mental illnesses. Something that we've never even heard of. We've never even seen jelly babies until this incident. We've never, ever, ever had history of cancer. These were people that were basically some of the finest navigators in the world, considering Marshall Islands is 99.99% water with only 60 square kilometers of land. Basically all those atolls you see, the combined land mass is only 60 square kilometers. Everything else is water to about 1 million square kilometers. Sailing from atoll to atoll with some of the bravest navigators in the world, the most resilient people that depended on their sustainable livelihood skills, things that they've lost ever since Cold War. So, next please. So obviously you guys saw that video. Here are the people from Bikini being relocated away from their home atoll for the nuclear testing program to commence. This is one of my favorite pictures, not because it's really disturbing, but because I actually personally know that little girl in that photo, who is not a little girl anymore. This is the girl I was talking about, where she thought the powder from the radioactive dust was actually soap that she would take home to her parents because she thought she had done something nice, saying, oh, I would help out, you don't need to buy soap, here it is. But actually she poured some in her hair and thought, why not take a shower right now? So she ended up losing her hair. One of the saddest part about the Bravo testing was some of the people that were actually there, they were taken by the US military and told to go into the lagoon, I think if I'm not mistaken, on Kwajalein, which was where some of them were taken, and they were all stripped naked, hosed down, basically because radiation was really, really new. They've never even known what the effects are on people. So she told me that they hosed her down. She was but a little girl laughing away, not knowing the traumatizing effect on the women whose culture kind of prohibits from showing skin, as these people were Christianized, so showing skin was not something to be done, especially in front of your brothers, your uncles, your grandfathers, and your male members of the community. As women in the Marshall Islands are basically the epitome of modesty. They are what you might call the perfect example of the culture. They basically uphold the culture. For her, she was but a child, so she started laughing, and some of the women that were trying to cover their breasts and looking down the whole time, how mortified they were and very, very embarrassed, not knowing what to do but listen to the American personnel who told them to basically strip, and once the Geiger counter went off again, they have to go back into the water, strip naked again before being hosed down. Because supposedly, if you wash off the radiation, it basically would take it away. So for her, one of the things she wanted me to share was like she hoped, even though she didn't have a video camera back then, she really, really wished that people could have seen the traumatizing effect it had on the women of our culture, who are basically the fabric of Marshallese society, because the Marshall Islands is a matrilineal society. It is basically very female-led. Our land rights, that as you saw in the video, where basically our land, our tide, they're basically matrilineal. So the women are basically the symbol of our culture. So for her, she wanted me to share that piece of history from her as a first-hand witness of what she had to undergo. And she has been carrying that guilt ever since then, telling herself, oh boy, do I really wish I had a camera just to capture that moment that I thought was funny because I was but a child. So, next please. So here are some of the images you saw of one of the other children that was affected. That's Dr. Conrad, I believe, who's one of the doctors assigned to look after the population. And right here, there's a woman right there. They're checking her thyroid, because one of the most common forms of cancer from radiation is actually thyroid cancer. Next, please. As you guys know, are you guys aware, you guys are pretty much aware that the UN ban treaty was, I just wanted to pay reference to the Marshallese ambassador's statement, what she really meant. So basically, just to give you a brief rundown, in 1953, the Marshallese people, this is actually my great-grandmother, Dorothy Kabua, and her son, my grandpa, Amata. They were the first Micronesians from the Marshall Islands to even sit in the United Nations Trusteeship Council meeting. That's in 1953. So an original request was actually made to stop the bombs. This was actually before Bravo in 1954. But after Bravo, as you mentioned, as Rachel actually perfectly introduced in the video, we actually made a formal petition to the United Nations again in 1954, represented by Dwight Heine. This was a petition that was signed by the Marshallese Congress. It was drafted by Abdullah and Dwight Heine. So basically, in 1954, a formal petition was given because of what happened during Bravo from the fallout, telling them to seize it. You've already seen what happened to these people. We don't want it to happen again, or at least do more safety measures before you do this again, if it is for the good of mankind, as you say, or for the peace and security of the world. Well, in response to that, in 1954, the 1954 petition, the United Nations Trusteeship Council passed a resolution to authorize the United States to further their testings. And even in 1956, when they did a second petition, another resolution by the United Nations Trusteeship Council was passed. So as you can see in this, the excerpt in this statement that the ambassador gave, if you guys might read it silently to yourself down there, you can see why she said those things. And I would also like to mention why in 1995 she also mentioned why we need help from the UN system, and she recalls the 1995 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, I believe, outcome document of 1995, because basically there is a special responsibility that exists to these people, because, how do I say this lightly without hurting anyone? Because it's really obvious. You guys, the UN authorized it. They authorized, the US also dropped the bomb, even though they actually told them to stop it in 1953. And even before the 1947 UN Charter was signed, they already commenced their program in 1946. So it's pretty obvious that when you're a global superpower and leader of the free world, you get to do what you do. Even now, as you know, like, the US is the biggest funder to the United Nations. Next. So I just wanted to say moral corruption within the ranks, to pay reference to what Setsuko, the activist Setsuko-san said. She said, nuclear weapons have always been immoral, and As you can see in some of the statements here, the most famous one by Henry Kissinger, when some people were like protesting against the bombs in Micronesia, he said, there are only 90,000 people out there, who gives a damn? It's these statements like these that you just like, oh my goodness. The situation back then was really, really that bad, but I'm really glad that people like you guys are here. So, and there are some other statements that some other American representatives in the UN basically saying we don't consult the UN, we disinform. And that was basically clear as they already tested in 1946, despite the UN Charter being willingly signed by the US a year later in 1947. And right here, another statement by Sears. As you can see, he basically said the United Nations gave permission when the 1947 UN Charter was signed. So right, next. These are just other, basically the same kind of statements made, and where they said even the Security Council gave their blessing. So just to give you guys a rundown, as I said, if you guys look at that chart, this was actually taken from a Harvard Law School student advocacy report. They actually helped us out, and they were spreading awareness. This chart kind of shows you the comparison of the yield of the testings in World War II, Nevada, and the Marshall Islands. So you see 108 megatons is compared. It basically dwarfs those people, and I just wanted to kind of point that out. So basically the total yield of the 67 tests conducted in the Marshall Islands was 108 megatons. This equates to the explosive force of over 100 million tons of TNT and more than 75 times the total yield of the nuclear tests in Nevada. So, next. So basically there was a report given that about 6 billion curies were released during the testing, and if you basically compare that to the other ones in America, like Hanford, Nevada, Chernobyl, basically dwarfs that too. So I also wanted to point this one out because this is actually one of the declassified documents. Just to point that out, not all of the documents from the nuclear testing program have been declassified. So this was just declassified in the 90s. So basically what it said was the highest average in the United States was lower than the average in basically all the atolls in the Marshall Islands. So basically they received a higher dosage. So you look at the compensation comparison with like several thousand, if you guys can look there, sorry, I'm a bit blind, but you look, Marshallese on average have received lower compensation in terms of reparations as compared to the American downwinders who like received to date about $1 billion. In Marshallese, I think they received around 70 million. So why I wanted to give this presentation was because I just wanted to remind everyone in the audience of the right of equal dignity. It is a human right. It is ever so etched clearly in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as the Compact of Free Association, which is the agreement between the Marshall Islands and the American governments, states clearly that it was founded upon respect for human rights. I wanted to make that clearly, especially given the disparity in reparation, the disparity in treatment, and the disparity in basically how these people are viewed. Because if you see some of the statements, whether on video or on live, you will hear some of these victims tell you straight out loud that they were treated like guinea pigs. And if just seeing those charts, that comparison is pretty obvious why they would tell you that to your face. And that is something that is very, very heartbreaking to hear, even as for me, I'm a Marshallese American, I'm a first generation American, and I'm also Marshallese. But I actually wanted to bring us back to why Ambassador Amatline Kabua, the Marshallese ambassador to the UN, said that the nuclear ban treaty makes clear that there is a portion on one of the articles for victim assistance and environmental remediation. Obviously, our capacity as a small island developing state, isolated with lack of adequate health care, is not enough. So basically, it tells the user states, those who have tested nuclear bombs in the Marshall Islands and elsewhere, to fulfill their obligation, especially their human rights obligation to the victims that sacrificed immensely for global peace and security. And I already mentioned why she mentioned the 1995 Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, and I also wanted to mention a part in the compact, which is in section 177. There's a change circumstance petition. Basically what it says is the Marshall Islands has a right to kind of tell the US Congress that what the money that they gave was inadequate to meet the demands of the people in terms of proper health care and fair reparations when considering evidence that could not have been reasonably identified, making the existing agreement of the compact settlement inadequate. As you guys all know, not all of the documents were classified when the compact, declassified when the compact was actually signed. So it took about several decades for them to release some of the evidence. Some of them was in 1994, which was one of the Atomic Energy Commission's reports. I showed you showing greater damage than was previously known. And today, that change circumstance petition still sits with Congress, so we kind of want the US to kind of take responsibility for their actions, because it really is a human right. It's a right of equal dignity. I mean, these people are equally human. Why not give them their share of what it is they really deserve? They sacrificed a lot, and I'm not here to like play favoritism. I'm an American too. I have nothing to gain. I'm not going to get any of that money for sure. And I just wanted to kind of show this side of history that is hardly known. I mean, just to give you guys a background, like up until the 1960s, the Marshall Islands and Micronesia was literally closed off because of these tests. They closed off the entire area. And during this time, like basically the only people that were allowed were scientists that were conducting the experiments and anthropologists that were doing studies for the US military so that they could know the culture. So some of the people that would try and apply for visas, this was during the time when you applied for your visa, and by the time you got it approved, it already expired. So this is really, really sad, because even then, like, as I was talking about the 1956 petition, the man that actually did the petition to the United Nations got suspended from the US Trust Territory Administration that was in charge of administering the islands and preparing them for independence. So basically, he was suspended for several months because he spoke out for those people. And back during that day, just to give you guys background, if he spoke too loud, if Marshallese spoke too loud, the High Commissioner, which was basically the guy in charge of administering the Marshall Islands or Micronesia, like that area, on behalf of the United States, they hold on to your paycheck. So that man, that Joy Jaime, that presented that petition again after the 1954 one and then now the 1956 one, he was suspended for six months or more. So it really, really is a depressing reality for some people, but it is really, really amazing how people have persevered in telling their stories and how amazing it has reached this far. Like, a story like this has been really, really isolated and taken out of sight and out of mind up until the 1960s. It was basically, the area was basically closed off. And in the 1970s, even when Micronesia, this is not the Marshall Islands, but Micronesia is a region. Marshall Islands is in Micronesia. So back then, when Micronesia, the Congress of Micronesia, was finally invited to what they call the Cafe, the Economic Commission of Asia and the Far East by the UN, by the first time, most of the people at that meeting, they didn't even know where the Marshall Islands was or what Micronesia was. This is in the 1970s. So can you imagine how little the world knew when the compact went into existence in 1980? And it's only in 2017. So the Marshall Islands in the global stage is a very, very young country. So you guys can always kind of see why they're always at the front line in terms of nuclear issues and of course climate change. And the reason why I bring up climate change is because those people from Bikini that were relocated to that other atoll in Gili, they suffer high tide flooding all the time. Every king tide, the water comes from sea level rise, climate change, like up to waist level. Some of them are like 60, 80, some of them can't even walk. So it's really, really sad. And they're actually, they appeal to a politician from Hawaii if they could get some money to kind of relocate from that atoll because it gets flooded every time. And the saddest part is once it gets flooded, the planes can't land. They can't land to give them emergency assistance. And to make matters worse, because the place doesn't have a lagoon, it's hard for the ship to just come in. So they have to wait and wait. And the Marshallese government it's a small island, developing state. It doesn't have the resources. And one of the other stuff I would like to mention was if you guys saw that dome, that cactus dome that houses all that nuclear waste, it's leaking. It's leaking. And one of my friends that came on Peace Boat is really, really upset because with sea level rise, every time the seas comes, it just seeps into the water every single time. And under the Compact of Free Association between the United States and the Marshall Islands, there's a section there in section 161 of that compact, and it basically says that the U.S. government must apply NEPA to any of its activities in the Marshall Islands as if it was the U.S. So all the same standards, environmental standards of EPA must be applied in the Marshall Islands as if it was the U.S. So I just wanted to showcase a little bit of that history, and hopefully it will inspire you guys to learn more about these people. I mean, some of these people are really, really suffering immensely, like having to lose people every day from cancer, and then hearing people think that they're only after the money. But really, it really is the principle that counts. It's their dignity, like to be treated as less, to be treated as guinea pigs, and then be told that they're after money. But in reality, they're just trying to get their fair share, just so that they could live another day, pass on to their children that the message that they are equally human, equally entitled to the world's blessings. Why should they be treated less than their fellow man? So hopefully, this copy of my presentation is really brief, but I give permission for it to be shared. So